Hello, my name is Beck and welcome to my wrap up for October. I'm going to talk about all of the things that I read and maybe also didn't read during the month. It has been a wild time. I have been in transit of moving house for more than 6 weeks now, so everything just feels a little bit chaotic, but bear with me. First of all, in October, I ended up finishing an audiobook called The Sunbearer Trials by Aidan Thomas, and Aidan Thomas also wrote Cemetery Boys, which I really enjoyed. Sunbearer Trials, though, is about Teo, who is a 17-year-old trans boy, and he is living in a city where they celebrate the Sunbearer Trials. And these trials are kind of reminiscent of the Hunger Games, also with religion and different gods thrown in. So essentially there are golds, jades, and humans. And golds obviously are the renowned people that go to this special academy for specific training for the trials. And the jades are kind of integrated with humans, not quite golds, they're very much in between, but they never get selected for the trials. And then obviously there are just the regular humans. So the golds and the jades often come with their own kind of ability, almost X-Men like. And so Teo has wings and he's our main character, and he's also a jade. So naturally, because it's about the Sunbearer Trials, you expect him to be involved somehow, and that definitely comes to a head as the story progresses, and I won't spoil anything. This one had a very easy narrative to get invested in. It had characters and side characters that you were interested in and intrigued by because they felt like they weren't just stereotypes. They had a good relationship with Teo. He had great self-awareness in terms of his own capabilities and anxiety, and he reached out to his friends when he needed it, which is really important to do, I think, and to see conveyed in a story like this. And ultimately why the trials go ahead in terms of the plot is Sol is the sun god. So every decade they have to be replenished. So Sol is the sun god, who is also non-binary. That's why I'm saying they. And so they have to be replenished every decade, and because of this they have to do a trial and make a sacrifice. And so you know at the end of these trials one of the characters in this story is going to be sacrificed. And so it's a story leading up to that and all of the fame and glamour that all of these characters experience, and it's a really intriguing take on that glamour and the alliances that form from, I guess, experiencing trauma together. I liked the story, and I think even though it was young adult, which I don't generally reach for, I think it was fun to read despite the dark themes in here. And I did see one or two things coming in the narrative, but that's just because I've read young adult stories for years. That's the only reason I saw things coming. If I didn't stop and talk about it for a reading vlog, I think at the time, I probably wouldn't have connected the dots as thoroughly as I did, but I'm used to talking about stories. I've read a lot of stuff that's similar, so other people might not see the things coming that I did, but I had to put things together in order to form coherent thoughts for a video. So because of that reason, I saw a few things coming. So I'm going to give it a 4 stars, and I am anticipating the sequel. I do not know when that comes out, maybe 2023, but I think it's also a duology, so it's not like I've started a massive series, which I am grateful for. And then throughout the month, I read a whole bunch of graphic novels in anticipation of a new release. So the graphic novel I'm talking about is Saga, and I summed this up and discussed it spoiler-free in a recent reading vlog, so I will link that for you if you are interested in checking that out. But I love this series, and it's a reread, and I only have up to volume 6 here, but I read up to volume 7. Volume 7 I left in my lounge room and I forgot to go and grab it. So I'm kind of trying to get up to date and read 9 volumes, and I'm filming this at the very early beginning of November. So I obviously didn't get to all of them in October, but that doesn't really bother me too much. I love this series because it is so in your face, but in a great way. So it really follows Alana and Marco, and they are from Landfall and Wreath. And Landfall and Wreath are a warring planet and a warring moon, and for centuries, I feel like it's centuries, it's that ingrained in their cultures, they have been at war. So they are alien races at war for such a long time that it just becomes the understood thing that people go against each other if you're from Wreath or Landfall. And these two characters are soldiers, obviously, because there is a constant war happening, and it keeps bringing in different alien races. And so you naturally have to pick a side. So these characters are conscripted in the war. They meet each other because Marco is a prisoner of war and Alana is his kind of supervisor. And so they kind of form an alliance and they fall in love and they have a child. And this child has horns and wings, and she is the poster child for what this war does not want to be politicized. They do not want a harmony to happen between these two races. And they've been fed, I think, all of this propaganda to say that these two races can't produce safely, but these two have made a child. So they are all on the run and lots of people are trying to kill them. And there's a lot of politics happening, but there's a lot of beautiful and brilliant and dark character work happening as well. And I think I said in my vlog that these stories have such kind of whiplash moments in terms of they'll just present a one-page spread to you or a page spread to you in Fiona Staples' beautiful art style, and it is captivating and breathtaking, but you also just feel quite taken aback at times as well. Like on one page spread there was a massive troll giant with his genitalia just like all out there, and I forgot that happened, and I was like, oh, I did not need to see that. Even the way that the first volume starts is very reminiscent of how the rest of the story pans out. I'll leave it at that. But I love these stories, despite how graphic they can become. I think the way that they manage to kind of do that is a testament to how well the story is told, because they're kind of like a mini plot twist along a massive journey. And I love the narrative style as well, with their daughter Hazel narrating around kind of the edges while the characters have natural dialogue throughout the story. I think it's a really clever way to tell a story, kind of like having a narrator in a comic book while the characters interact. It's really great and it just really works, and it doesn't take you out of the story whatsoever. It actually gives you more of an emotional impact, and it makes you consider things more spread out on a universal scale rather than just these characters. It makes what they're going through relatable to you, even though you are not an alien at war with the moon. So I've given each of these volumes 5 stars each, and I anticipate that I'm going to give the rest of them in the series 5 stars, and then I'll eventually get to volume 10 and hopefully I give that 5 stars too. These books are designed to just absolutely break your heart, but they are so worth it. And then I want to talk about the book that I did not finish this month. I picked this up based on what Daniel Green might like, because I thought maybe my tastes coincide with some of the stuff that he reads. It didn't work for Snow Crash. I tried, I DNF'd, I didn't get very far in, and I know that I wouldn't like the rest of this based on the way that the prose was. It was very intentionally tongue-in-cheek, but it felt overbearing to me and over-descriptive and kind of facetious. I don't really care for that. I don't really go for the more classic kind of sci-fi, and that's what this is. It's about the metaverse and these characters hating their lives, and it's more broad than that because the world has varied from what we understand it as today. So it is kind of like a dystopian future sci-fi, and I like those genres generally, but I didn't really like what this story was doing. It probably has a great commentary, but I just don't care for the writing style, and it felt very alienating to me. There were massive long sentences. It felt like the main character was overcompensating, but at the same time, like I said, it all felt very intentional, and because that's the style of the story, I feel like it was going for that style, but it's not a style that I like. So just based on my own personal enjoyment and not necessarily how the book is put together, I'm sure lots of people like it. I just didn't. It's not my thing. So I ended up putting it down. Unfortunately, I thought I might end up putting it down, and that's just what happened. And then straight after that DNF, I ended up finding a 5-star read. It's one of my new favorites, obviously, of the year, and it's by Rincha Pecco, and this is Silver Under Nightfall. This is a fantasy story about vampires, and already I was like, vampires, they're kind of 2000s for me. I had a massive vampire phase like every other person, but this has gotten me back into liking vampires again. Ultimately, this is a story about Remy, but it also features Zidane Malik, which is a noble court vampire, and Ziadan Song. I'm going to get their names wrong. I'm so sorry. I've tried so hard, but they just fall out of my head when I listen to an audiobook. So those 3 characters are our main characters. Remy is like our main character, but those 2 are definitely major focuses, given that this is a polyamorous romance, but set in a vampire dystopian fantasy world. So it is about overall the rot, which is this virus that's breaking out and infecting people. I can't remember if it's just people or vampires or vice versa, but either way there is an outbreak, and people who suffer from the rot end up becoming like these zombified regenerative versions of vampires that are obviously incredibly deadly, and it's a very contagious disease. So Zidane Malik is a High Court noble, and he is trying to find a cure for this virus. Lady Song, who I'm going to say instead of her first name because I keep messing it up, Lady Song is, yes, his wife, but also a character that is quite prolific and strong and is helping him try and find a cure for the rot and figure out where it originated. So there is a whole political conspiracy with the noble courts and with the humans and with this rot, where it came from. And that's kind of how Remy gets involved, kind of by accident. He stumbles across an attack and he gets directly involved by accident, and so he gets swept up with these noble court vampires, and they all together go and try and find what is causing the rot. And at the same time, Remy is also trying to find the Night Court, the elusive Night Court that has theoretically been killed off, but there are still kind of murmurs and rumours about them, and he's trying to track them down and avenge his mother because she was murdered by the Night Court, according to his father. So a lot of the story was very much dependent on world building, which I absolutely adored, and of these characters. So Remy is very angry and broody. Lady Song is quite peppy, but not in an annoying way, which surprised me. And then Zidane Malik is that brooding kind of character, but also kind of cold and standoffish. And because he's such an old vampire, he's got a lot of baggage. So because of that, there's a lot of communication that happens in here. And often when I see a character like Zidane, they are portrayed in a toxic way that is very uppity and their ego comes first. But that wasn't the case here. There was brilliant communication with all of these characters. This book was so sexy and I just loved it so much. I want more immediately, and it's a new release as of this year, so I cannot go and read the sequel, so I might just have to reread the first book, but I loved it so much. And I kept thinking about these characters when I had put this book down because I had to eat dinner or something, and that to me is a sign that I just want to be back in this world 100%. So I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. If you think that maybe vampires aren't for you, these vampires will be for you. I loved this. I loved it. I loved it. And then another DNF, unfortunately, is Gearbreakers, which is a young adult, also dystopian sci-fi. I didn't have much luck with sci-fi dystopia this month. This is about 2 girls, and they are both 17. I assume one is a Gearbreaker, but I didn't get far enough into the story to confirm that. And then the other is this girl who's gone to an academy. And after attending the academy in this place called Goodolia, who is a nation at war, they get surgery and then they get hooked up to these giant mechs. So it described this main character's body as having no like organs or blood cells or veins or anything in her forearms. It was just all cables because she had to be hooked up to this giant machine, and this machine is like basically the same size as Godzilla. It's huge, and she just lives up in its head and then controls the whole thing. So the Gearbreakers are the ones that jump into those machines and they break up obviously all of the wiring and the gears, and they just make one thing not work so that the whole machine breaks down. So that is, I guess, what is happening. There is a massive war. There's obviously propaganda. This main character doesn't want to be a pilot of this giant mech. She just wants to leave. So she already doesn't gel with the propaganda that is being told to her, and she wants to get out of it. And then I'm assuming the other character is a Gearbreaker, and it's a sapphic romance. So I'm assuming they meet up at some point and then romance. But I didn't get far enough into it just because it didn't have really a spark for me. I'm not sure why, I just couldn't get into it. Maybe it was the format. Sometimes I struggle reading things on ebook, and I did borrow this on ebook from my library, but I just didn't care for this. It wasn't, making me think about it like Sylvan to Nightfall, and I wasn't actively disliking it or anything, but I just couldn't get into it. So I ended up putting it down a few chapters in. But then, thankfully, I did finish another book, and I initially gave this 4 stars, but I'm thinking I might have to lower it to maybe 3.5, 3.75, and that is Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is a story about a bunch of different characters. One of them is Elva, and she is a warrior who's about 21 or so, and she has joined this warband, and she ends up going back with the warband to meet her father, and she's given an ultimatum at that point. Then we've also got Varg, and he used to be a thrall, which in this world is like a slave with a collar, and he's broken away from that and escaped, and he's trying to join this blood-sworn brotherhood of warriors so that he can find their she-witch or Sidir witch, I don't know how to pronounce it, so that he can task her with doing a spell to find out who murdered his sister and enact revenge upon them. So he goes down this path of trying to become a bloodsworn. And then in addition to that, there is Orca, and she is mother to a 10 or 11-year-old boy with her husband, and then one day people in their village turn up murdered and the kids are going missing, and that makes Orca worry for her own livelihood. So that is the very bare bones of each character's story where they start. And I just want to say that the writing style in here and the terminology to begin with, it felt quite hard to get into, and I think that's why I struggled a little bit with it. But in addition to that, I just didn't really care for most of the characters. There's only one that I kind of was majorly interested in throughout the rest of this book, and the others kind of went up and down and then kind of petered out. So while I didn't dislike this, I think it has grown from what he's written before, which was Malice. I'm sorry if you can hear the kookaburras, it's a very Australian thing to say. I think that while it has grown from Malice, in terms of the writing style, the execution and the world building, I just didn't care for it. Like, it didn't have that spark for me that made me think about it when I wasn't reading it. The only reason I thought about it was I feel bad that I've been reading this book so long, and that's not a reason why I should finish something. The only reason that I didn't finish this quickly was because we are painting a house and it takes a very long time to do that, and I think I'm ultimately glad I finished it, but I'm probably not going to continue on with Hunger of the Gods. I do like the way that this ended, but to me personally that ending didn't warrant all of the legwork it took to get there. I felt, to be honest, very much in the world when I was reading it, so that part absolutely John Gwynne nailed it, because I felt like I could taste the sea salt and I could smell the meat cooking and I could feel that hard bread and cheese. It felt very Viking inspired, which is what he was going for. So he definitely nailed that, and he wrote a really great story, but it's not a story that I'm excited about necessarily. It's just a story that I thought was good and now I can move on. So probably 3.75 stars. It's got to be more than Malice, but it's not quite a 4 stars. And now lastly, the 2 books that I am currently reading are A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers on audiobook. This is the second Wayfarers book, and I loved The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. This is a reread for me, and I can't talk about the synopsis for Orbit without spoiling the first book, so go and check out my review for that, because I plan on reviewing this whole series. I'm really enjoying this. I love just how intentional Becky Chambers is, and I love how heartfelt and deep all of her characters are, and how much of a safe space her work is for queer people especially, and she just manages to think so far outside the box that it becomes very existential, but in a very good way. I really enjoy her work and how she's made the alien somehow feel relatable. It's very clever, and so I'm really enjoying naturally my reread, but then I've also got an ebook that I'm currently reading, which I don't usually read too much of, and I'm hoping to get this done before the loan ends at my library, and that is the Southern Book Club's Guide for Slaying Vampires. I'm about 25% into this, and it is the way the book title suggests. It's about these women in the early 90s, and they are all housewives who have young children, and so they're going out of their minds because before they had families, they had jobs like everybody else, they had their lives, but now they've been not shafted, but they've been given this ongoing chore of maintaining and looking after their children. And because they're Southern, they are bred to be very polite all the time, even though that's not what they're thinking and not what they intend sometimes. It's just what they are perceived to be, so that must be the way they put themselves forward. So I like that theme, and I think you can do a lot with it, but I also know that there are going to be vampires in here legitimately, and I'm really excited to see that come to a head and how these women deal with it. At the moment, they have started this true crime book club because they want some excitement in their lives, so they catch up with each other, talk about crimes and murders in very grim detail, as well as living their daily lives, and I quite like that juxtaposition of everything is kosher and they're living their normal housewife life, but then they're also talking about bloody crimes and murder. I love it. And the writing style is got that dry humor, and it seems quite palpable and just easy to read. So in some aspects, it's not like it's super gripping and fast paced and it'll suck you right in. It's just enjoyable and I can sit down and have a coffee and read it. It's just easy. So I'm looking forward to continuing it, but I just haven't found time to read it. And if you want to try and see whether this book is for you, just read the introduction, because the introduction absolutely sucked me in and I loved it. So I'm really liking this. I'm just not making time for it because I keep forgetting that it exists because it's on my phone. It's on my phone. It's not on my bookshelf or anything. So I'm struggling a little bit with remembering that it's there, but I am really enjoying it. And really that sums up all of the stuff that I have read and started during the month or put down. So if you've had any DNFs, do let me know what you've put down. It may break my heart, but maybe it won't. If it's my favorite, everyone has a subjective reading taste, so I'll try and forgive you in the comments, but I'll come chat to you down below in the comments and I'll see you in my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.